Thank you everyone for joining for this final session on the B2B Forum. I hope you've all had a fantastic week at the 2024 installation of EU Hydrogen Week. I know I've had some great conversations. Likewise, I hope you have also enjoyed your time. So this final session, we will be looking at e-fuels market uptake and production challenges. So taking us through that, we're going to have a range of experts giving presentations on their respective fields, what their companies are working on, and how they are integrating and entering the e-fuels market today. My name is Jake Stones. I am the hydrogen editor at ICIS. For those of you who don't know ICIS, we are a commodity pricing and intelligence service, which means essentially we price around 150 commodities globally across sustainability, fertilizers, petrochemicals, energy, and we also forecast and provide analytics around these commodities as well. But that is enough about me. We are actually here to hear some very interesting and important things from experts and innovators within the e-fuels sector. When talking about e-fuels and transportation, it's important to remember that we've heard a lot about the hydrogen hype over the last few years and how maybe we're facing some realism at this point in time and a bit of a plateau around progress, and moving forward now with confidence with the sectors that are likely to succeed in the hydrogen and e-fuels space, hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels sectors, and that is industry and that is transport. Industry, we understand that there are a lot of energy-intensive areas that simply electrification does not really work, and that is exactly the same for transport. We need molecules. Molecules have to remain within these sectors if we are to successfully see these sectors flourish, continue and grow, and decarbonize at the exact same time. From a policy perspective, we have lots going on. There is FuelEU Maritime, ReFuelEU Aviation, and of course the Renewable Energy Directive, all setting mandates, all setting targets for the use of hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels by 2030 across Europe. And ultimately, the success of these targets will really show whether or not Europe is on track to meet its 2030 ambitions for decarbonization, and of course, whether we're on track for the path to 2050. As I mentioned, we will have some fantastic experts over the next hour bringing you insights from their worlds. The way that this is going to go, so I will introduce one of those experts one at a time. They will come on, they will give a presentation on the screen. Oh, there's me. There will be a presentation from each individual bit by bit. They will then stay on the stage. I will welcome another guest, and we'll cycle through this until we've gone through the entire suite. Then, at the end, we're going to have some time for a Q&A. And this is something that you can all be involved in. You can ask your questions to the panelists, and there will be Slido on stage as well. So that's broadly it from my introduction and my welcome address for this session. Our first speaker today will be Ana Paula Corredor Pereira, who is the Senior Manager for Project Development at Eternal Power. Now, Paula is a process and energy engineer. She is passionate about sustainable development within the e-fuels and energy sector, and she is ultimately a green hydrogen and e-fuels expert, and particularly an expert around the challenges when it comes to developing these projects. A bit about Eternal Power. Eternal Power is global. It is working on mobility fuels projects in Europe across Sweden, Germany, and Italy, but they are also developing projects around the world. So, for example, South America, Africa, as well as Asia. So really a global look at the e-fuels and hydrogen sphere, and a really interesting first presentation to kick things off. So please, could you all give a really large round of applause and welcome for Paula. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Paula Corredor, and it's a pleasure to be here today to share with you insights from of our experience at Eternal Power at scaling e-fuels production with a focus on maritime fuels. So here's what I will cover, starting with the regulatory drivers, followed by our role as a company in the e-fuels production field, and how we shape, in that way, the European energy transition. I will also tell about the challenges and solutions that we have faced so far and we have implemented. And I'll finish with showcasing some of our ongoing projects in the maritime industry. So let's dive in. And as we all know, the EU has set very ambitious targets for decarbonization. In the aviation industry, by 2030, the ReFuelEU Aviation Initiative dictates that at least 1.2% of the whole fuel that is used at European airports must be synthetic SAF, meaning electrically produced SAF. And by 2050, that must be at least 35% of the whole fuels volume. And when looking into maritime, the International Maritime Organization strategy emphasizes on greenhouse gases emissions reduction, so that by 2030, 20% of the GHG emissions are avoided compared to 2010 levels, and reaching carbon neutrality in the sector by 2050. On top of that, specifically for Europe, all the ships that are docked at European ports by 2030 must use shoreside electricity or use zero emission technologies. So there is an evident demand growth, but there is also lack of production capacity. For example, in the aviation, more than half of the needed 2030 eSAF production capacity is still to be developed. And in maritime, only 5 to 8% of the projected demand by 2030 has been or is covered by announced FID projects. Those gaps represent an opportunity for innovative developers to establish a foothold in the market. And that's what we at Eternal Power do. We cover the entire hydrogen value chain, from the location selection for cost-effective production all the way until final delivery. And we consider as key for low cost or competitive cost derivatives production the large-scale production. And that large-scale production comes with its shares of challenges, of course, and that's why I'll present here some of the challenges we have encountered, and along with the solutions that we have implemented or are working on. And the first obvious one is the high upfront investment and development risk that is reflected in high production costs. And that we tackle through what is deep in our DNA, which is the vertical integration of the renewable energy plant, the production plant, carbon capture plant, and the logistics and transport. We also work on creating synergies across industries, bringing together multiple stakeholders to share not only infrastructure, but also to accelerate political decisions or permitting processes. We also target the establishment of pilot and flagship projects to demonstrate the feasibility of large-scale operations. And this is especially important for CO2-dependent plants. We meticulously select our production locations for excellent access to resources and infrastructure. And we also actively get involved in conversations with politics to drive demand through regulatory framework. Another challenge is the partially developed transport and storage infrastructure, and that's why we prefer or aim to settle in locations where we can anchor into the existing infrastructure. But this can also be mitigated through forging public-private partnerships so that CAPEX and OPEX are shared of bunkering and refueling infrastructures. And also establishing robust global supply chains might help overcoming technical and logistical hurdles. Very important at large scale production are the social and environmental impacts, which we would like to turn into positive ones. And that's why we aim to train local workforce and also to implement infrastructure improvements through, for instance, slightly oversizing renewable energy plants or desalination plants. And there is one challenge that is very typical to emerging markets, such as the e-fuels one, and is missing here. Can you guess? Offtake. Yeah, and that's why I put together here the key considerations at structuring offtake contracts based on our experience. The first one is the contract duration. For project financing, it should be between 10 to 15 years, independent of the amount of stakeholders the agreements are signed with, which ideally is not a single one. All the contracts should cover a minimum of 65%, ideally towards FID 80% of the plant production capacity. And they should implement some thresholds that allow flexibility for off-takers while maintaining revenue certainty for us producers. When it comes to pricing mechanisms, it depends on the project phase. Fixed prices facilitate first commitments and also simplify financial planning. But other price flexibility options, such as price corridors with a cap, that can be also helpful. And for firm agreements that are needed further later on for FID, for example, periodic price reviews are helpful and maintain fairness for both parties while allowing price adjustments under significant market changes. There are also other approaches or pricing models that align with production fluctuating production costs, such as the contracts for difference or cost plus margin. And last but not least, we should also consider the local framework because the green certification and standards vary worldwide and also evolve at different paces. And being aware of all those challenges and the possible solutions, we at Eternal Power develop our projects so that they tick all the boxes. For example, our flagship e-methanol project in Sweden, it's located in an area with access to low-cost renewable energy with a high availability, also with plenty of water access and biogenic CO2. And it's also in the proximity of a port so that logistics and infrastructure is simplified. We're also very proud of having signed 2 term sheets that cover 100% of the production capacity of our first building stage. And similar with our earlier stage green ammonia project in Chile, that is located also in an area with great mixed renewable energy profile, also with good water access. The process site is at a port location, and we are in advanced conversations with 2 shipping companies covering 10% of the projected production capacity, which is very promising for a pre-feasibility project. I'm looking at the time, and that's why I would like to highlight one of the key takeaways that I've brought today, and is that vertical integration industry synergies establishment and public-private partnerships are the key to scale to overcome the challenges at a large-scale production of e-fuels. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to connect with you and answer your questions after this session.
Thank you very much, Paula. That was a great introductory presentation. One of the themes of this week has definitely been about what do we do about offtake, what do we do about demand, are we seeing demand move forward? So I'm pretty sure that the content of your presentation will be highly appreciated from the audience. Thank you very much for that. Now, it's disappeared because it's just me on stage, but there's a QR code when a speaker's on, and that is for Slido. So if you want to get your questions in, that is your access to it, that is your route to question market, so to speak. Right, our next speaker is Raghu Vishwanathan, who is actually the Director of eFuels Supply Chain and Strategy for Smart Energy. So we've just seen a project developer. Now we're looking a bit more at the sort of investment firm side of things and what it takes to see projects be bankable and really, really take those projects forward with the support of companies like Smart Energy. Raghu has been in his current role since July this year, but before that he brings 20 years of experience across chemicals, materials engineering, and just a wide range of companies and portfolios as well. For example, he has formerly been the Global Head of Strategy and Business Development for Sustainable Aviation Fuels at Neste in Amsterdam, and he was very much focused on driving growth in that market. So we are dealing with an expert who really does understand how to bring e-fuels to the market and expand them into today's evolving economies. So please, can you give a very large round of applause for Raghu, and thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Jake, for the kind introduction. I think there's a lot of hype that I need to probably maintain the standards from here. And I'll probably start with a little introduction about, what is smart energy. And probably many of you know smart energy from your other presentations that you've heard across different forums and also through different interactions. We are primarily a private investment firm focused on investing in projects that we predominantly develop across mainland Europe, and we've so far built about 7 gigawatts of capacity, out of which we even continue to maintain or manage the asset of about 1.6 gigawatts, and that is with our own in-house asset management team, who also does remote monitoring and diagnostics of these solar assets. And how do we do that? We do that with our offices worldwide. We have about 12 offices globally, and present in 6 different countries globally, with offices headquartered in Zurich. And right now in our project portfolio, I was told that it's already increased to 16 gigawatts of development pipeline. And I would say about in that 4 gigawatts, around about 4 gigawatts, is in active development in the hydrogen and derivative space, in addition to another 4 gigawatts in the pure renewable energy space as well, in the active development. So we do that with overall 400 plus employees globally, and we have presence offices in Portugal, Spain, Germany, and Italy as well, with key teams and competence centers, and we've also established office in Abu Dhabi recently to focus on the MENA market as well. Moving on, to stay relevant on this topic, I would say that I'll focus on these 2 projects that you've probably heard of before from Smart Energy earlier as well. And as Jake introduced, my focus have been in SAF previously as well, so I'll stick to that SAF topic for now, and maybe if needed, we can jump into anything else during the Q&A. And on this note, I would say the 2 advanced projects that we have reached key milestones in phase of advancements of the development itself is Project Leisha and Galileo. These are based in Portugal, and the third one is also in the early stages of development, which we would probably not go into the details at this point in time. And Leisha and Galileo are placed strategically, I would say, because they are closer to the Porto and Lisbon airport in Portugal, and which also enables us to have direct access into the airport infrastructure for supply of the eSAF itself. And again, we started this project with certain limitations, not from the regulation perspective this time, but from the technology perspective itself. And one such limitation, that is in terms of the sizing of the project itself. Because in order to produce SAF, there is a minimum requirement of how much capacity that needs to be established as part of the development itself or the construction itself. So that brings us to the sizing that we started with a 250 megawatt electrolyzer, which translates to about 2,000 barrels per day, which is equal to about 80 kiloton of eSAF in a year in terms of the production. And then we, in parallel, started developing the project Galileo, where we saw the opportunity and saw that there is also the ability to bring in economies of scale through which that we move to 250 plus 250. That's what you see here, total of about 500 megawatts electrolyzer, and that translates to a capacity of about 155 kilotons. And we've working with Worley here, who's supporting us with a pre-feed study on this particular project, and we're also established the technology licensing with Topsoe Sasol as well. And these projects are in the pre-feed stage, and we will go into the details about the challenges that we faced as we were going through the development of this project, which can give some insights into what could be the challenges from the production side. And thanks to Anapalo, who already highlighted the market in terms of the market potential and the regulatory challenges that we might have. And the other speakers will speak about the regulatory challenges, I believe, as well. But I would focus on really from the production side, from over the course of development, what challenges that we faced and how we addressed it from different perspectives. And on that note, as you see here and on the chart on the left side, I would read it from bottom to top. And the key contributor that you see here, even if it is from a pure play green hydrogen production or even with the e-fuels production, the biggest contributor on the cost is the electricity, and which is about 50 to 60% of the overall cost for the production. And then the second contributor is the CapEx. So that totals to overall 90% of the cost for the jet fuel production, jet fuel production itself. So we'll go into the details of what we did and how we can probably manage it reasonably and by certain strategic initiatives that can be made as a developer. And last but not least, how do we combine these factors with the economies of scale and how that cost can also be brought down. So first, as we saw on the previous page, the first topic is on the electricity. What you see here is that with our in-house development capabilities, we put together the skills that we had to have a captive RE supply for these projects. And overall, what we were able to see is that by achieving 30%, at least on an average, of the captive RE supply for these projects of these size, we were able to bring down the LCOE of the overall production cost itself for the jet fuel. And then on top of it, we were able to combine that with the PPAs that we can procure from the market, and that makes it very competitive in terms of where the production cost can be. As you see here, the weighted average production, the electricity cost is quite low compared to what we've seen in the market. And this is in specific to these projects. So this is not related to the general market in Portugal itself. And that's why with our expertise in the Portuguese market and also the ability to procure large amount of green power in the Portuguese market, we were able to drive the overall cost of the electricity for these projects, and that helped us drive the cost down for the LCOJ as well. Whereas on the second point that we talked about, this is with regard to the optimization of the project itself. The way I would read this chart is that, as you see here, we have split it into two portions. One is on the hydrogen production itself, and then the timeline based on the LCOJ, or the timeline based on the eSAF production. So we would want to take advantage, of course, on the additionality that we could have. So start with achieving the green hydrogen production before the additionality clause gets kicked out. And secondly, once the projects being in Portugal that you see here, as per the Portugal National Electric Plan, electricity plant, by 2030, 2031, they are expected to reach more than 90% of renewable electricity in the grid. So that will enable us to tap the grid directly for all our production needs for the green hydrogen and the SAF production itself. So with that, we are able to actually increase the load factor on these production from 61 to 91, which means that the 30% increase in the load factor is actually translating to a 30% reduction in the LCOJ itself, where you see the drop in the LCOJ from 45% to 33% in these projects. So that helps us really, timing the market and utilizing, again, the capabilities that we have in the market along with the captive production helps us to optimize the production cost itself. And the third piece that we showed in the previous slides is that in the economies of scale. What you see here is that clearly as we go up, of course, the cost of the production, the CapEx and the OpEx goes down, which is why these two projects that I mentioned are strategically placed, both from the location and from the sizing perspective. That you see here that the cost of the cost ranges for these hydrogen plant size, which is in the optimal phase between, which one is at 250 and the other is at the 550 megawatts. That brings the overall cost down, which is enabling us to overcome some of the challenges that is a key driver in the eSAF space itself, as we know that the cost of eSAF in the market forecasted to be around 5 to 8 times compared to the current jet fuel price itself. So through this, that we are hoping to and we are expecting to somehow reduce some of those 5 times or 8 times projection that we see in the market and be in a place where it is a little bit more attractive to the off-taker. And last but not least, I would say that how do we do it is that, as I mentioned, we have our in-house team vertically integrated into the organization, which is, as you see, we have the energy trading team, which is Juan and Has, based in Portugal and Spain, who helps us in procuring the power in the market through the PPAs and also through the trading platform that we have, and with the in-house operation asset management and the engineering EPC team as well, that we would be able to optimize costs further by having our own EPC management. With that, I will pause and hand it over to the next speaker or hand it over to Jake, and I'll be happy to take any questions at the end. Thank you.
There was hype, but I think he delivered. So that was a great presentation. Thank you very much. I mean, we saw the H2 Global auction announcements earlier this year, or the sort of successful bidders earlier this year. There were 3 lots within H2 Global, and ESAF had no bids. They cited regulatory challenges and difficulties behind that lack of bids. But we're seeing companies that are actually developing ESAF projects right here based on what Raghu was presenting. So just very interesting to see how sustainable aviation fuel projects are moving forward, and I would like to thank you for your insights in that. Now, moving to our third speaker, we have Vincent Darb, who is Business Development Lead at Greenlight Carbon Technologies. Vincent has a background in mechanical engineering, but also around 5 years of experience when it comes to strategy and strategic consulting. So he's got the technical expertise, but he also has the vision to see how that technical expertise can be applied in this new sector and field. And that is ultimately what he is doing at Greenlight just now. He is looking at developing projects that will propel Greenlight's direct air capture technology and hydrogen production technology into its next phase of development. So another very interesting presentation here within our eFuels section, and also just a completely new area of technology and expertise that we're about to hear from. So I would like you all to give a very large round of applause to Vincent. Thank you very much.
Yeah, once again, thank you very much for the kind introduction. And yeah, as introduced, I'm Vincent from Greenlight, and I'm gonna take a bit of a different perspective here, because we're a direct air capture company from Germany, so it's much more about the feedstock supply for the e-fuel market. Diving into that, as you sure all know, for reaching the global climate goals, it will not just be necessary to drastically reduce our emissions, but also to remove additional carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The estimates range around 10 gigatons of CO2 by 2050, which makes it a $1 trillion market opportunity. For what do you do with the CO2 that you remove from the atmosphere? You can either put it into negative emissions, meaning you store it underground permanently, or you utilize it in e-fuels, in construction, or in chemicals. Here, especially interesting is, of course, the e-fuels part. We've already heard a lot about this. Thanks for the introductions in that sense. We know that green fuels will be a crucial part of the solution for all the hard-to-abate segments of transportation. So especially if we talk about long range, if we talk about high energy density that is required, aviation and maritime, there will be no way around it. And the regulation was already mentioned. The markets for both SAF and green methanol are in the range of hundreds of millions of dollars by 2050. What we've also already heard about is the problem of the supply-demand gap. So there's, of course, supply, but the demand, also driven by the regulation, is way, way larger. The estimation at the moment is that around less than 37% of the demand can actually be covered by the supply that will be there in 2030. So then maybe stepping over to what's the role of Greenlight in this value chain. Greenlight has developed a pioneering direct air capture approach that also produces hydrogen, green hydrogen, in the same process. So what we're basically doing is from air, from water, and from renewable energy, we are delivering the green molecules that are then necessary for e-fuel producers to turn it into the e-fuels that the market demands at the right ratio. So we can adjust the technology in the CO2 and hydrogen ratio to deliver what the e-fuel producers actually need. That, of course, has some nice perks. The emissions reduction potential of making e-fuels from direct air capture is more than 90%. The feedstock is basically unlimited. And at scale, the simulations show that fuel prices at below €2 per liter will be possible. If we take a step back and look at the three main pathways for e-fuels, e-fuels from duck, e-fuels from point source, and the e-fuels from biomass, it shows that if you look at the emissions reduction potential and also at the scalability, duck e-fuels will be the most elegant and future-proof way to produce e-fuels, simply because we do have the highest emissions reduction potential. The feedstock, as mentioned, is unlimited, and both in point source and biomass or biofuels, which at the moment are way cheaper, we do have some limitations, either when it comes to the scalability through limited biomass, also when it comes to the actual emissions reduction potential and the regulation around it with point source. However, the disadvantage is, as we know, the costs. Currently, the main issue with that, and we've also heard about that, is that the expensive green molecules are the key challenge at this point. So the lack of cheap green hydrogen and cheap green CO2 are the limiting factor. And this is really where Greenlight's technology can shine, because the technology that has been developed over the last more than 50 years by one of our founders really enables us to deliver cheap feedstock, cheap green molecules for e-fuel production through the combination of CO2 and hydrogen production from one technology. And that, combined with the possibility for a rapid scale-up through utilizing off-the-shelf components, will enable us to really drive down the cost for these green molecules and help the e-fuel market uptake from the feedstock side. How are we planning to do this? Currently, we are prototyping. We have multiple prototypes running at our plant and headquarters in Essen. We are deploying first demonstration projects now and early next year. And then the next big step up will be a first-of-a-kind plant with a capacity of more than 1 kiloton of CO2 capture in 2026, with the goal of reaching 100 megatons or more than 100 megatons of capturing capacity by 2050 at a cost of less than $100 per ton. And just to reference back to the beginning, that would still be only barely 1% of the market of what we need to take out of the atmosphere. Taking a look at our founding team, as mentioned, Peter is the scientific heart of the technology, he has researched the atmosphere for more than 30 years and worked on this direct air capture technology for the last 15. And he, a bit more than 2 years ago, joined forces with two seasoned entrepreneurs that have both built businesses before, Florian and Niklas. And yeah, they bought the IP from the university and decided to bring this technology to market. Since the foundation, since the founding, we have reached some major milestones. Within the first 12 months, building a tech demonstrator with 100 tons capturing capacity, collecting more than 25 million of VC funding from major German and European VC funds, and building an impressive team that always surprises me with their skills and expertise, even at such an early stage. Some highlights to talk about. We were especially proud of being mentioned in the Norsken 100 impact list and being shown at Times Square. That was quite impressive for, such a young startup. And then also, we had visitors such as our Vice Chancellor and our former Finance Minister in Essen. Yeah, and with that, maybe just some views on the list of investors and partners that we have, building a green feedstock supplier for also the e-fuel industry in Essen, and hopefully for the world. And I'm looking forward to your questions later in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for that very interesting presentation. I have to say, so far, the Calibre presentation has been fantastic. There's a lot of data in all of this, and they're talking about real solutions, real challenges, and facing that with what I believe to be insightful information. Our next speaker is Joachim Jacobsen, who is Public Affairs Manager at Liquid Wind. Now, Joachim has a wide range of experience, particularly around the mobility sector. So he has formerly worked at companies such as Volvo Group, but he's also been involved in RISE, which is the Research Institutes of Sweden, and just has a range of experience within the industrial sector as well. So this is a fantastic next presentation where we will look at what Liquid Wind is doing. Liquid Wind is an electrofuels producer, and this is very much focusing on the maritime sector as well. So we're seeing, again, the viable demand sectors where you can use hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels, quite predominantly at the moment, maritime and aviation, as per the EU regulations I mentioned at the beginning of this session. So please, can you give a large round of applause for Joachim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jake. Nice to see you, everyone, even though I don't see much of you in the lights. I'm very happy to be here. I hope you also had a nice couple of days. I'm also extra happy today because we have communicated from Liquid Wind side that we have secured 44 million euros in funding from Uniper, from HiCap, but also a new investor, which is Samsung, which we are also, of course, really excited to have a Korean investor in a Swedish and European e-fuel producer. So let's see here. So despite being at the Hydrogen Week, I thought I'd focus a little bit extra on the other feedstock needed to produce e-methanol, namely biogenic CO2. And I'm quite happy I am the last one out, because I will really focus very narrowly on a couple of regulatory challenges. But I think you have provided good sort of background to this. So, well, as you know, you all know, the maritime industry has to change fuels due to FuelEU Maritime and the upcoming IMO legislation. So in about 1 year, we will know what the sort of pathway for IMO will look like. But when I'm meeting with the people negotiating, they are actually seeing the potential of a more radical shift away from fossil fuels in the IMO legislation. But let's see, we will know in a year or so. That means around 100,000 ships worldwide need to change fuels, 300 million tons of fossil fuels need to be replaced, and we see one of the potential pathways here is e-methanol, materialized in the more than 300 ships with dual fuel engines now being in order. So Liquid Wind is a Swedish company. We and our sort of production model is that we capture biogenic CO2, combine it with green hydrogen, producing e-methanol. And we are developing a modular, standardized, repeatable facility, production facility that produces around 100,000 tons of e-methanol annually, and then upscaling or upcycling 150,000 tons of CO2 annually. We don't do this alone. We work together with a fixed group of OEMs. So the carbon capture is done by a UK-based company, Carbon Clean. The electrolyzers will come from Siemens Energy, German company. The Swedish company Alfa Laval will provide us with heat exchangers, and then Danish company Topsø is responsible for the methanol process. And the nice thing is that all of these companies, our family as we call them, have also invested in Liquid Wind, providing them with a sort of long-term perspective on this opportunities. So spending some days here at the Hydrogen Week, I can't help but note the sort of repeated mentions of Flagship 1, to our big disappointment, mostly known for being cancelled by Ørsted. Our first project in Örnsköldsvik. We are now developing Flagship 2 in Sundsvall, Flagship 3 in Umeå, Sweden, and Flagship 4 in Haapavesi, Finland. And I should also mention that we have a strategic partnership with Uniper, so we are their project developer, and we are right now working together in Östersund in Sweden with setting up one of these e-methanol facilities. So to create such a project, we need a couple of things. We need, of course, someone producing biogenic CO2. We need grid connection. We need water for the hydrogen production. We need steam and heat for the CO2 capture process and the methanol synthesis. We need land, somewhere to build our facility, and we need logistics. So I will focus a bit extra on the access to biogenic CO2, and bear with me now if this would get complicated. I will try to make something quite complex easy. I had a very interesting meeting this morning with DG Energy and DG Klima, turning this topic around. But so if you do what we have done, we have sort of scouted all of Sweden and a lot of our neighboring countries looking for potential feedstock of CO2. You quickly realize that a lot of the biogenic CO2 is available in mixed streams containing both fossil and biogenic CO2. And that also it's quite common that the biogenic CO2 varies seasonally. This is true, for example, if you look at the waste-to-energy plants and combined heat and power plants in Sweden, which I just mentioned are included in the ETS in Sweden. They have a lot of biogenic CO2 available in wintertime when it's cold, and we use that power for district heating, but not so much in the summertime. And so how should we work with the mixed stream? Well, the Renewable Energy Directive says we should use the mass balance principle. So when doing the mass balance calculation of a mixed stream, what becomes very critical is the time period used for the calculation. And right now, unfortunately, the stance of the European Commission is that we should use a 3-month period. This means that there will be quarters where there simply are not enough biogenic CO2, whereas there are other quarters where we'll have a huge abundance of biogenic CO2. And we have tried to argue in meetings with the Commission that this period should be extended to 12 months. It would be more in line with the actual production cycle of these facilities. It would be more in line with other reporting that they do. It would not increase CO2 emissions importantly. And it would, what I believe, sort of unlock a huge potential, or at least a big potential feedstock of CO2 for the production of RFMBO in Europe. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Joachim. And that concludes the 4 presentations that we were going to have today around the e-fuels market and the various different companies that are looking at different angles for entering this market. Something to mention before we get into the Q&A, which I'm very much looking forward to, is that the high-level policy conference, which will be beginning its sort of closing remarks after this session finishes, so don't leave now, that will be available to everyone. So if you do want to see that and sort of see how this week is being closed out, I do welcome you to attend that after this. It's in Hall 11, which is that way. Right, so let's begin with a bit of Q&A. I suppose something to kick us off, there's a really interesting question that's come in to begin. Which is the bottom question I'm going to ask there, is are there markets where e-fuel quality ends up becoming a competitive advantage, and are there customers willing to pay for e-fuel because of benefits it provides on fossil fuels? And I suppose another way of looking at this is what is the qualitative difference between conventional fossil fuels and e-fuels? Is there something that's noticeable there? And the other side of things, if I can add just a tiny bit to this question, is do you see interest in customers willing to pay for e-fuels because of the sustainability criteria that come into that as a fuel rather than conventional fossil fuels? So would anybody like to begin with this? Joachim?
Short answer is yes. That is what drives the market today. And it's especially true for companies that have signed science-based targets. There is a demand for sustainable transport, absolutely.
Amazing. Anybody else like to come in? Paula?
I think more than willingness to pay is that there is the pressure over there, at least for airline companies. And I always love to highlight the power that we and consumers have. And airlines must fulfill those quotas. And we are the ones that now have the chance to pay for that SAF, or in the future for eSAF. So yeah, there are already customers willing to pay for that.
Amazing. Yep.
Yeah, I'll just say 2 points of view on this in terms of what is the competitive advantage or benefit of e-fuel against fossil fuel. One, the overall life cycle emission reduction. When we compare what is the overall carbon content on the fossil fuel itself against an e-fuel. And so from a net carbon reduction perspective, there is going to be a benefit. That's the first part of the answer. And the second part is when we look at absolute numbers on the e-fuel itself, there will be a market for it. And the regulation says that the SAF, for example, needs to meet a 70% GHG reduction criteria. But when we look at e-fuels production perspective, there is a possibility to achieve more than 90% greenhouse gas reduction from an overall life cycle analysis perspective. So that the incremental, the gap of the additional 20 or 25% of the carbon reduction in itself can be a market there in terms of the carbon trading or the carbon pricing itself. So there could be a potential market, and it's still all deliberation at this point in time, but we see that there is a market for it as well.
Amazing, thank you. Vincent, did you want to come in?
No, I think nothing to add at that point.
Okay, amazing. Thank you very much for that first round of answers. We talk about the need to accelerate supply and accelerate demand. I suppose an interesting question for the panel is, are there essentially any synergies that we can leverage to speed up the ramp up of e-fuels in the maritime and aviation sectors with what is already conventional today? I was just wondering if anybody would like to take this as a question. So synergies and lessons that we can learn from conventional markets that we see to accelerate the uptake of e-fuels. Okay, It was a difficult question. Another thing that I would mention then is, Paolo, you said that 5 to 10% of the demand for the maritime sector by 2030 under regulation is covered by FID-based projects. Do any of you have comments on what could essentially support or increase that percentage share of FID up to 2030? Why is there such a gap, and what could bring that gap down? Yep.
There are regulatory uncertainties of what happened post-2040, and that is, I think, if the new commission creates more clarity around that, I think that is something that would help investors, who of course have to have a long-term perspective. So that is, for instance, regarding CO2 regulations, that could be one thing.
Amazing, thank you. Paolo, did you want to come in?
Yeah, this is the ideal chance. I call for all the investors out there. I think there is no other way we can reach the carbon neutrality we're aiming for, and it's just the willingness to invest, even if they are not the most profitable projects, but still, of course, all the projects must bring some revenue. So yeah, more willingness from the investor side.
Amazing. Anybody else like to come in on increasing FID, or we can move to another question that I've seen from.
No, I mean, maybe Jake, I want to pick up on the previous question in terms of the learnings or the synergies, and because I was just reflecting on it while the others were answering as well. So apologies for the delayed response. But I would say one thing with the whole e-fuel space in itself is that it provides us the opportunity for us to decentralize the overall market and the production of the fuel itself. Today you see that the fossil fuels, there are big players and only they have a skin in the game. The rest are not having enough opportunity to really make an entry into the market. Whereas the e-fuel is going to give us, as every single player, it's going to give us an opportunity for all the small players to have a play in the game, and also it would decentralize the production more globally as well, so that the dependency is not towards in one particular region or one particular country in itself. So that's probably something that we need to look at as an advantage and see how we can scale or how we can capitalize on that advantage. And secondly, I would say from a price perspective, yes, it is expensive today, but if you look at fossil fuels 50 years ago, it was expensive. And there were reasons and there were mechanisms put in place to bring the price to where it is today, and we anticipate that a similar mechanism would follow as well towards the overall cost or the cost reduction or the price reduction of the e-fuel as well. So that's something that we should probably be mindful and be prepared to face it as we grow in this market.
Thank you. Joachim, did you want to come in?
I'm a bit slow. I'm sorry, we have a slow panel. We are talking about synergy. Okay, so there's one clear synergy. What has driven technology development across almost every sector is the cooperation between military and civil sector. That is what, if you can do that, that is my old industry, the aviation industry, etc., etc. This is an untapped potential when it comes to e-fuels today. And when I meet with the Swedish Armed Forces, kind of waiting for NATO to make a decision. So Europe and NATO has to agree on this. I think, the production of a decentralized production of e-fuels all over Europe will strengthen our security of supply when it comes to fuels. We have huge weaknesses today. 98% of all fuels are imported to Europe. We shouldn't pretend that we can become completely self-sufficient, but we can decrease these weaknesses that we have in our societies. And military and civil cooperation in some way. There's synergies that could be done. And I think if we look at the NATO Energy Excellence Center, have published a couple of reports, very promising, I think, their view on synthetic fuels. The other question that they want on unity fuels for all applications, so that is could be a challenge. But I think that is one synergy that could help this industry speed up.
Amazing. Thank you for coming back to the question. That made good use of using that time to ask the question. I really appreciate it. Vincent, I've seen a question that is probably quite focused on your sector with Greenlight. So why not tokenize CO2 that's captured via direct air capture and store it? And those tokens allow for the consumption of fossil fuels instead of going through the trouble of producing an e-fuel. Not my wording, but that is the question. So what would you say in response to that? Why not just continue to capture that CO2 and keep it stored rather than go through the process of creating a product at the end of it, so to speak?
Yeah, no, I guess a fair question. I think there's a political and philosophical aspect to that, because I think one of the key issues is that, first of all, we do need drastic emissions reductions. And the challenge that is always mentioned, if we provide an alternative through just taking it out of the atmosphere and storing it and letting everybody continue doing what they're doing, I'm not quite sure if that will get us where we need to get. And then, of course, we also have to consider that the fossil fuel production comes with risks and challenges as well. And so it's also not that simple, I think, to simply just keep on doing what we're doing now, get the CO2 from the atmosphere and put it into the ground, which of course also is a technology that is still maturing and comes with its challenges. So how many storage sites will we actually have? How permanent can the storage be done? All that is challenges that still need to be solved. So I think it's something that in the end will be different solutions that come together to solve that. It's not just one solution that can solve it completely.
Interesting. So very much like a mentality perspective change, rather than saying let's continue as normal and pretend the problem's over here. You're talking about we actually need systems and sentiment reflection in moving towards 2050. Thank you for that. Paula, did you want to come in? Yes.
Yes, and as you said, fossil fuels prices will rise, and they are becoming more scarce and will become scarce at some point in time. And we do need the carbon molecule to produce the alternative fuels. So that's why we do need to keep it in the cycle.
Excellent. Another technical question, maybe one that we can answer quickly, or if someone can answer quickly, which is for your e-fuels businesses, maybe a quick reflection on pros and cons of the point source of carbon capture versus direct air capture. So what's the difference? What's the benefit between just carbon capture technology and actually taking it from the atmosphere? I feel, Vincent, this is maybe one for you to come in, but if someone else also wants to come in as well. Okay, Vincent and Raghu, do you want
maybe
to?
Maybe I quickly start. Of course, cost is one major point. On the other hand, if we look at the emissions reduction potential, of course, there's no comparison, because if we do carbon capture from a flue gas stream, turn it to e-fuel, then it still ends up in the atmosphere later, but still it ends up. And direct air capture, of course, turns it into a circular carbon economy, which is a complete difference. Cost still is a point in this consideration.
So using what's there rather than adding to it is excellent. Raghu?
Can I add just one thing?
Okay.
No,
Joachim.
Just there will be more industries competing over those atoms going forward. It's not the fuel industry. There will be a demand all over. If we look at the new commission, will start to look at the chemical industry and perhaps provide them with some guidance as what is perceived sustainable going forward. So this will change, I think.
Amazing. Thank you. And then, Raghu, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was just saying cost to Vincent, in fact. So that's what he picked on, and I wanted to actually see them spar, because it's a competition between them about direct air capture and
Amazing. I suppose we've got less than a minute left. Maybe a very quick summary question for you all is, do you think that Europe is on track to meet its 2030 targets, the ones mentioned in the policy mechanisms I expressed at the beginning? And do you see any particular markets being your core target for offtake? Joachim, if we could begin with you and then go down the panel.
We are absolutely not on track. We're moving in a completely wrong direction. Fortunately, there are companies who want to be sustainable, who want to take responsibility, and they will drive this business until regulations force everyone to be sustainable. But right now, no, it's very dark.
Thank you. Vincent?
Yeah, I can just agree to that and maybe add regarding the markets. I think also driven by regulation already, the SAF market and also e-methanol are two very interesting markets that we're looking at.
Perfect. Raghu?
No, I mean, I agree with the overall sentiments that's been there all through the conference here as well, that, you know, for sure that we probably won't be in terms of meeting the targets where we want to be by 2030, and what can the Commission do, or how can we change the regulations to actually accelerate or enable it? That's going to be very critical.
Thank you.
I also agree. We will hardly reach the 2030 targets, but that's rather a call not to give up, but just to work harder on the 2035 or 2040 targets. We all have to remain optimistic and work hard on that, and I think the hard to debate sectors must take more responsibility to that.
Okay, thank you all very much for that summary. Ultimately, we are facing a sort of 5 or 6 years of quite a lot of challenge. That's why I would like to give my sincere thanks to the panel, who are all in sectors who are actually trying to solve that problem rather than part of the masses who are sort of, we need to convince, so to speak. But I would like to thank you all for the insights you've given. I'd like to thank everyone who's in attendance. You stuck in there. This is literally the final session of EU Hydrogen Week on the B2B Forum. So thank you very much for your attendance. I'm actually really pleased to see so many of you. And yeah, just a huge round of applause for you, huge round of applause for the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.